Mark chapter 1, you can find your place. Mark chapter 1. Uh, in Mark's gospel, he really wastes no time in just kind of getting to the point. He's very careful with his words, so we want to get to the text as quickly as we can this morning. And in Mark chapter 1, we're going to look at the end, verses 35 through 45. There's a picture for us. It's a picture of what Christ can do for anyone who comes to him for healing. But as we read it, I want you to consider that it's not merely a picture. I want you to think of it as a mirror. Because when you look into a mirror, you see yourself. An image can show you something that is glorious, that is wonderful, but it is not until you see yourself, it's not until you see the depth of your own need and your own condition before the Lord that you're able to actually receive the very thing that Jesus Christ offers those who come to him. And that's been my prayer all week, that we'd see this as a mirror. So Mark chapter 1, beginning in verse 35. And rising very early in the morning while it was still dark, he, being Jesus, departed and went out to a desolate place. And there he prayed. And Simon and those who were with him searched for him, and they found him and said to him, "Everyone is looking for you." And he said to them, "Let us go on to the next towns, that I may preach there also, for that is why I came out." And he went throughout all Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and casting out demons. And a leper came to him, imploring him, and kneeling said to him, "If you will, you can make me clean." And moved with pity, he stretched out his hand and touched him and said to him, "I will be clean." And immediately the leprosy left him and he was made clean. And Jesus sternly charged him and sent him away at once and said to him, "See that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priests and offer for your cleansing what Moses commanded for a proof to them." But he went out and began to talk freely about it and to spread the news, so that Jesus could no longer openly enter a town, but was out in desolate places, and people were coming to him from every quarter. Those first verses, 35 through 39, we could easily linger on those, spend time, because it is fascinating that Jesus, the Son of God, the one who, through whom all the world was created, who's casting out demons and healing people with merely a word of his power, needs to pray, longs to pray. If you're familiar with the narrative before this, if you're here last week, you know that Jesus had a very long day. Before this, he was in the synagogue and he was teaching. He happened to cast out a demon who was not very happy with him. And then from there, he went to Simon's house and healed his mother-in-law of a fever. And then during the night, all sorts of people were knocking at the door. They're wanting Jesus. They're looking for him. He's doing all of these miraculous things, probably goes to bed late. And then instead of sleeping just a little bit longer, he gets up early. Imagine everyone else was still asleep. And he prays. Rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed and went to a desolate place. Is that what rest looks like after an exhausting day? Is his preparation for what comes next requiring that he get up early, he get away from people and spend time in communion with the Father? See, I think there's this deep connection here between his inner life, the depth of his inner life and his communion with the Father, and then the very miraculous, astounding work he's about to do. Jesus needed to pray. And even though this morning I want to concentrate on verses 40 through 45 and the cleansing of the leper, I think we would be remiss not to point out the principle that really emerges from the details of Jesus' own inner life. The more we have to do, the more we actually have to pray. The more we feel squeezed by our circumstances without much time, and there's so much to do and things that have to be done, the more time we actually need to be on our knees. I was convicted of this all week, and something that kept coming to mind was Robert Murray McShane, who was a Scottish preacher just known for his devotion, for his godliness. And one of the things he wrote in his diary was, he said, "I ought to pray before seeing anyone. I feel it far better to begin with God, to see his face first, to get my soul near to him before I get near to another." So there's this connection between what happens in our secret life of prayer, on our knees before God, and everything else that happens in life. Spurgeon said, "God will not send great blessings in the way of conversion if secret prayer is neglected." He said, "Let the church forbear to pray, and God will forbear to bless." And so we pray, and it's our declaration of dependence upon God. Jesus did the very same thing. How much more should we? So his day starts early once again, a little less sleep for a little more prayer, and verse 40, it says, a leper came to him. Now, we're not giving any biographical information about this man. We don't know who his parents were. We don't know what life was like growing up. We don't know how long he dealt with leprosy. We don't know any of those details. But the fact that Mark simply says a leper came to him, we actually know a lot about this man's conditions, the extreme nature of his conditions, what he must have been thinking and feeling, what life was like for him, because, well, as one Old Testament scholar describes it, the existence of a leper was nothing more than a living death. It was a living death. In fact, this is his fuller description. He says a diagnosis was as much a death sentence to the ancient Israelites as tidings about an advanced malignancy to a modern patient. Once a man was branded as a leper, he had to adopt the posture of a mourning, tearing his clothes, allowing his hair to be unkempt, covering his beard or mustache, and crying out wherever he went, "Unclean, unclean, unclean." He had to live outside the camp, perhaps in the company of other lepers, and his existence was nothing more than a living death. See, he would be cut off from society, cut off from family, cut off from people and worship in the temple, and be an utter outcast in every sense of the term, without hope and without God. And so leprosy in the ancient world, it was incurable, it was contagious. It was really dreaded by everyone. In fact, if you were to just see a leper coming in your direction, it wouldn't be unusual for you to maybe flee in terror, letting everybody else know what was going on. In the Jewish context, a leper was just simply considered the most unholy person. It was a slow, lonely way to die. Paul Brandt, he's a physician and sort of an expert on leprosy, wrote about it, and he described it as a painless hell, because he said the disease acts as an anesthetic. It's bringing numbness to the extremities as well as to the ears, the eyes, and the nose. And so, in other words, if you had leprosy, one of the things that would happen is the pain mechanism of the body would begin to shut down. And so if you can just imagine that you're not able to feel that perhaps the water is too hot, or if you accidentally cut yourself shaving, or you get a nail through your foot, you just simply wouldn't feel the pain. You wouldn't be able to attend to it, and you would begin to become disfigured, and your body would eat away, and you would be nothing more than a walking corpse. Now, you might be wondering, so why go into all the detail about leprosy and the condition and the physical nature of it? Well, I think simply because the key to understanding this passage is that when you see the leper, you see someone who is destined for a lonely, hopeless condition. And here is this symbol, this powerful symbol of your and my moral depravity. That in this event, we're not simply to see the outward physical nature of what was going on. No, Jesus is pointing to something much deeper, the spiritual condition of any person outside of Christ. The key to understanding Mark chapter 1, verses 40 through 45 is to recognize that we all come to Jesus in the same condition. Spiritual lepers. Now, in one sense, the situation seems foreign to us. I mean, I doubt you've ever walked into a room and had to pronounce to everybody that you're unclean. You probably have at least some social network and interaction with people, and you're here. You haven't been placed out of worship and put on the fringes of society. But in another sense, here's a living parable depiction of our spiritual condition in the eyes of God. That's how Paul would describe it in Romans 3. No one is righteous, no, not one. No one understands, no one seeks for God. All have turned aside. Together they have become worthless. No one does good, not even one. Listen, all of us enter this world as spiritual lepers. So actually the message of this text, the burden of this text is not for the self-righteous. It's not for those who think they're okay. It's for those who know that they are in need. Listen, it will do you no good to remain unconscious of your sin, the pervasiveness of your spiritual condition. Selina Hastings, she was the Countess of Huntington, and in the 18th century, she was a big part of the evangelical awakening in England. And she was part of the aristocratic society, the upper class, and she came to faith in Jesus Christ. And ever since then, she wanted to tell other people. There was so much joy, so much newness in her life. She wanted everybody to know. And so she would regularly invite people to come and hear the gospel of Jesus Christ. Her favorite preacher was George Whitefield, the famous evangelist. And so when he was in town, she would invite people. And there's this sort of famous letter that she received from one person that she invited, the Duchess of Buckingham. And the Duchess of Buckingham was not very pleased to receive an invitation from her to hear George Whitefield. This is what she said: "It is monstrous to be told that you have a heart as sinful as the common wretches that crawl the earth. This is highly offensive and insulting, and I cannot but wonder that your ladyship should relish any sentiments so much at variance with high rank and good breeding." It probably sounded better in an English accent, but here was a person absolutely appalled at the thought that they might be considered a sinner in need of God's grace. I don't suppose many of us want to hear the state of our own soul, but until we know the actual state of our soul, what chance do we have of receiving what Christ and only Christ can give to us? And so if you look at this text as not just a picture of something glorious, but a mirror sort of examining your own soul, you have to ask, have I dealt with the leprosy of my soul? Have I come to the place where I've desired with earnestness peace and healing and wholeness? And well, if you have, if you want to be clean, let's pay careful attention to the approach of the leper. This man in Mark 1, the gravity of his condition is matched by the intensity of his approach. And I think It'll help us, especially if we're struggling to understand where we're at with Christ. It'll even help us as we come to the Lord's table this morning. Well, here's the first thing. We need to come without hesitation. We need to come without hesitation. Look at the verbs in verse 40. He came. He was imploring. He was kneeling. The approach of this man was really quite shocking when you understand the laws regarding leprosy in the Bible. The word leprosy was actually sometimes used as sort of a catch-all phrase for all different types of skin diseases and conditions, some much more severe than others. However, the parallel account to this in Luke's gospel is talking about the same man, says that he was full of leprosy. In other words, he had been disfigured to the extent that anybody who saw him coming would know that man has leprosy. That man is unclean. And there's actually 2 entire chapters in the Old Testament, Leviticus 13 and 14, completely devoted to what do you do with leprosy? What do you do with people who are lepers? And what do you do if you come into contact with someone who's a leper? And, over time, the rabbis would actually add more and more restrictions to that. So, for example, one had to remain 100 cubits away if they were upwind from a leper, 4 cubits if they were downwind. Laws stipulated that if a leopard passed you while you were outside, what should you do about that? Or if a leper so much as stuck his head in the window of your house, the presence of the entire house would be considered unclean. And it just goes on. And if you were touched by a leper, if you came in contact in any way, you too would be considered unclean. So here you can just begin to grasp the fact that if you're a leper, you are shut out of every inch of society. But did you notice this man comes despite all the regulations? He wasn't supposed to be in crowds. He wasn't supposed to be around all these people. He wasn't supposed to be coming close. And yet, because he sees his need, he sees that there is something that can remedy his need. He's not worried about being a fool. He's not worried what people will think. He doesn't care about the laws. He comes straight to Jesus without hesitation, not keeping a distance. Throwing himself close enough so that Jesus could touch him. And the Greek word used here indicates just a sense of deep urgency. He says, if you will, you can make me clean. Did you pick up on the fact that he didn't wonder if Jesus could make him clean? He's asking if he's willing to do so. He's not saying, Jesus, if you're able to. Again, there wasn't ever a cure for leprosy up until this point. No one had ever experienced that from full leprosy, from a full condition, what we would call Hansen's disease now. And here is this leper, and he's come, and undoubtedly he's heard about Jesus. He's heard about the miraculous. In Matthew's gospel, it takes place right after the Sermon on the Mount, so perhaps he had just taken in all this teaching from Jesus. He doesn't question that Jesus has the power to do what no one else can. And this is the type of confidence that we should bring when we come to Jesus Christ. When we think we're beyond hope, or when we believe we become far worse than we ever imagined, we should never, ever get to the place where we doubt Christ's ability to save us and to draw us out of the trenches of sin. And that's just a reoccurring theme in the Gospels. Over and over again, Christ reaches into people's lives, people that we think are beyond hope, and he pulls them out. And this week as I was preparing, praying, it just came to mind that I know for some of you, perhaps your greatest heartache is that you have a son or a daughter who's walking nowhere near the faith you tried to pass on to them. And without minimizing the difficulty of that situation, I think even this text is a reminder that they are not too far outside of Christ's ability to save. He can cleanse, he can renew even the hardest of hearts. Now, some have argued, however, that this man is concerned not with whether or not Jesus can heal. He knows without a shadow of a doubt that Christ can, but whether Christ is willing, that he's perhaps doubting the willingness of Jesus, saying, maybe you want to heal me, maybe you don't, I'm not really sure, but I'm actually persuaded to believe that this man simply knew that he was in no place to demand or presume upon the power of God. In other words, sometimes we reduce salvation to this formula, like if you just repeat these things, then God has no choice. Well, no, it was out of Christ's grace that he gives to this man. Paul says in Romans 9:16, so then it depends not on human will or exertion, but on God who has mercy. Now, whatever this man thought, we should never hesitate to come to Jesus. Because we know that anybody who comes to him with this earnest desire to be healed, to be cleansed, to be saved, he will never cast away. He will never turn away. He will never, ever shut up his compassion to them. And this man doesn't presume or demand the healing power of Christ, but he comes and he begs for it. Well, that's really the second thing. He comes without hesitation, just believing in his power. But the second thing is he acknowledges his absolute helplessness. And that's what you and I need to do, to acknowledge our helplessness before him. It's a demonstration of coming before him and saying, I recognize your lordship. He's imploring him because he's desperate. Do you notice there's no persuading, there's no bargaining, there's this total abandonment. Now, this is the kind of faith that obtains cleansing. I don't know if you've realized that there's really nothing that you bring to the table. There's nothing you can do to clean yourself. I think sometimes we have this idea that even at our worst, there's still a little bit of good in us, and I can sort of remedy this situation and fix things on my own. I don't know how many of you remember from high school English Shakespeare, but Macbeth, one of the tragedies that Shakespeare wrote, has this powerful scene. See, the basic storyline, for those of you who don't remember anything about high school English, is that Lady Macbeth encourages her husband to kill the King of Scotland, to take the throne. There's this civil war. It's just a bloodbath. It's horrible. And after they've hatched this plan and carried it out, they're plagued with guilt. In fact, Lady Macbeth is so plagued with guilt that even in her sleep, she sees blood on her hands. And she's scrubbing it and scrubbing it and scrubbing it, and she's trying to get the blood off. No matter what she can, it just doesn't matter what she does, how much she scrubs. The blood doesn't come off. It's still there. Drives her insane. She just wants the spot to be removed. And friends, there's nothing that you could ever do that would alleviate your guilt and your shame, except to receive the cleansing of Jesus Christ. We can wash our hands until they're raw, but it cannot remove our sin. So you might ask yourself in just a moment of honesty this morning, have I come to a place where I realize that my sin means I stand condemned? Have I acknowledged that without submission to Christ, there really is no hope? Have I cast myself upon his mercy? You will never, ever, ever experience the depth of Christ's cleansing power until you realize that there's nothing you could do to remedy the situation. And this man, in the midst of all this, we can't miss the fact that he fixes his faith on Christ alone. Right? There's nothing external. He doesn't come pleading his own merits. Look at verse 41. It's Christ alone who does the work. Moved with pity, it says, verse 41, he stretched out his hand and touched him and said, I will be clean. And immediately the leprosy left him and he was made clean. Now, some translations use the word compassion, which is probably a fair bit more accurate, that Jesus is moved with compassion. We saw that last week, the raising of Simon's mother-in-law from her illness. And you might think, what? Who wouldn't have compassion on this man? You hear about his plight, and why wouldn't you have some ounce of emotion towards him? But it's interesting, when you read the Gospels, they really say nothing about what Jesus looks like, and nor do they often refer to his emotions. But here, in this short passage, we see how Jesus felt. It's an intense feeling. And it's probably saying one of two things. Perhaps it's compassion, as I already mentioned. I mean, just allow that to sink in for a moment. I mean, when Jesus looks at you, he doesn't look at you with disdain, but he looks at you with compassion. When you come to him in your spiritual bankruptcy, he doesn't respond begrudgingly. When he sees you in your hurt, when he sees you in your need, and the fact that you're coming to him asking for pardon, he meets you with a heart of compassion. However, there's a variance in some of the New Testament manuscripts that actually says Jesus was not moved with pity or compassion, but that he was moved with anger, a deep-seated anger. Now, if that's true, you would have to ask the question, what's the object of his anger? Because anger always has an object. We're angry at someone or something or some situation. I don't think Jesus was angry at this man, if that's the right reading. Immorality wasn't behind the leprosy. But what was behind the leprosy was the same thing that's behind all sickness, all brokenness, all sin. It's the brokenness of this world. And in the very beginning of Mark, Jesus actually enters into a broken world. He makes that very clear, and he does head-to-head combat with the evil that is behind sin and sickness and suffering. And so it wouldn't be unthinkable to believe that Jesus responded with this inner rage towards the consequences of the fall. He looks at this man, and he's like a ruined building that was once created to give glory to its architect and its creator, and now is ruined. And Jesus has come to make things right. Now, whatever the correct reading, compassion, anger, the point is the same. Jesus is not unmoved by our struggle. He's never indifferent to our condition. When people come to him, he doesn't turn a blind eye. Now, notice that Jesus didn't just feel something, he did something. He reached out and he touched the leprous man. Did Jesus need to touch him? Well, of course not. In Mark 1, we've already seen that when he's met by a demon-possessed man, he just says the word and it happens. He doesn't need to touch him. He doesn't need to be in close proximity to him, and yet he does. Why do you suppose that was the case? Here, I believe that one of the things Jesus is doing is indicating that it's not just the physical that needs healing. It's not just his outward condition that needs to be remedied, but his very soul needs to be made new, needs to be made whole. He's lived so long without human contact, without being in relationship with other people, years of isolation and pain, and it is a single touch of another human hand where Jesus communicates that he loves him. Now, according to the laws, even an unintentional touch would render someone unclean. So perhaps you have this image of Jesus where, it's just this quick, rub the shoulder and then back away, because it doesn't He doesn't want to be caught by the religious authorities, but that's actually not the case. In fact, one New Testament scholar says that when you look at the language, you realize that Jesus took a hold of this man. He grabbed him. It was a moment of extraordinary tenderness. It was a life-altering moment when he felt the healing touch of Jesus. It goes further. Been helped by Sinclair Ferguson's book on Mark, and this is what he says about the importance of this touch. He said, by touching him, he was really saying, I'm prepared to become by choice what you are by nature. A man under the judgment of the law in order to share with you what I have, freedom and life. And it's this picture of the man with leprosy being touched by Jesus that really helps me to understand 2 Corinthians 5:21. For our sakes, God made him who knew no sin to be sin, that we might become the righteousness of God. I mean, here's just this wonderful illustration of the saving work of God. Like leprosy is to the body, sin is to the soul. It disfigures our hearts and our thoughts and our desires. It distorts our actions. It leaves us outside of everything God ever intended for us. There's no cure within ourselves. It leads to condemnation and death and despair and separation. But it's only by the cleansing blood of Christ where there is a measure of hope. What you need more than anything else is the saving touch of Christ, because when he touches the disease of sin, he makes what is broken and diseased clean and new and pure. Amen. Lastly, I want you to notice the welcome that he receives. Verses 43 and 45, Jesus gives two commands. The first is a warning. It says he sternly, uses strong language, sternly warn him, see that you say nothing to anyone. Now, this is already the second time we've seen something like this, where Jesus does something miraculous, and instead of saying, hey, this is great for public relations, he says, hey, just keep quiet about it. Don't say a word. And we know that it's not that Jesus is trying to keep his power a secret per se, but Jesus is on a mission. He's on a mission to seek and to save the lost. He's on a mission to preach the gospel, to bring people to faith in himself. And so he wants to stay on that because he knows that with the crowds already coming towards him and harassing him in some way, that he doesn't want it to be interrupted anymore. Amen. And this man doesn't listen. Some says I'm not sure what to make of it, because if I tried to put myself in his place, and if you can just imagine you've been cured from leprosy, I mean, everything about your outward appearance is completely different, and if people would say, hey, what? Something's different. Oh, yeah, no, nothing. No, just same old. Going to go back outside the camp now. Nothing happened. No, I mean, he was excited. He was telling everybody, look at what Jesus did for me. And there was actually a consequence. Jesus had to stay out of town and go to the desolate places because this man didn't obey him. The most I can make of this is that we have the ability to help or hinder the work of Christ. And so how we are and around other people and how we live out our faith just simply matters. We don't know what happened to this man, but we know there was a second command. He says, go show yourself to the priest and offer for your cleansing what Moses commanded for a proof to them. And so to fulfill Leviticus 14, Jesus tells him, look, you're to go and show yourself to the priest. The priest, part of his job was also sort of a chief physician in the sense of declaring whether somebody is now actually clean, whether it was valid. And then afterward, you were to go to the temple and worship, give gratitude and thanksgiving. And so he sends the man back to the temple to perform what the law required as a testimony. It doesn't actually tell us if he made it to the temple. But I imagine if he was there, he might say something like this to the priest: what you and the law couldn't do, Jesus did. I mean, all these years, the law has only brought condemnation upon me. But Christ has done for me what the law could never do. No longer am I on the outside, but I've been brought in because of this man, Jesus. And so it's no wonder that Paul would say in Romans 8 that what the law was powerless to do, weakened by the flesh, God did by sending his Son in the likeness of sinful flesh. In other words, look, Jesus is very clearly saying, look, the law is enough to condemn you. The law is enough to make you aware of your need and your sin and your guilt, but it is not enough to save you. Once again, it is only through me that you will find wholeness. Here's what this teaches us: no matter who you are, what you've done, how inadequate you feel, the amount of your shame, when Christ intervenes in your life and touches you, you are made clean. That's another detail here we just can't miss, because it tells us how this all happened. I mean, did you notice that here is this man with leprosy, and he is on the fringes of society? Jesus was just in the synagogue not that long ago, in the midst of the center of life. The man on the fringes, the man who's outside, receives a healing touch from Jesus. And now Jesus, we're told, has to go to the desolate places. You see, on the cross, all of our uncleanness was laid on Jesus. And when he died, Hebrews tells us that he died outside the city gate. Not only that, we know he died outside the intimacy with God the Father that he had forever enjoyed. He said, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And what we learn here is that the Lord was made an outcast so that you and I could be brought in. Amen. He went to the fringes so that you could be brought to the center. He became sin. He took sin upon himself in order that you could receive this righteous, perfect record. Amen. So the story is not just a picture, but a mirror. The longer you look into it, the more you see yourself. And you should be asking the question, what should I do? Well, the response is actually very simple. Whether you do it here this morning, whether you do it when you get home, to simply get on your knees and say, Lord, I believe you can make me clean. You do that, and he will hear you. And he will say, I will.